Giving it till about 10:04, everyone. Aaron, what's your word of the day?
Are you talking to me?
To Aaron.
Oh, word of the day. I would say intentional. In many ways, the work I do, where I'm at in life, and then also with this, the knowledge and the stories that we're sharing, being very intentional.
Thank you. How about you, Cahill?
Yeah, I was going to say reflecting. Just being on this panel, I've been reflecting a lot on how far I've come in my position in our organization, and everyone else, I'm sure, too.
Awesome. Ray?
Word for the day. I don't know. Conscious. Just want to be conscious.
How about you, Art?
Adrenaline.
Nice.
It's like it's pumping for this. That's that energy.
Julio?
I would say peace. Peaceful morning with my children and really calm, not so windy out.
Nice. All right. We're going to start in 1 minute. I would say esperanza. Or hope. All right. Okay. Everyone, I'm going to get out of chat. Here we go. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Innovative Land Access for Urban Farming Public Partnerships webinar. This workshop is an opportunity to talk about lands access for folks with less resources in public spheres and public spaces. One of the biggest challenges to growing food in urban areas, in often spaces without a supermarket, is land's access to be able to do so. Soil quality is sometimes a concern. Air quality is sometimes a concern. One's own health and safety is a frequent thread, a theme to think about, to consider. When we talk about agroecology, we're talking about growing health in ourselves, our communities, healthy economies that are equitable, that make a difference, that consider people's well-being and care.
If you're satisfied with the message, press 1. To listen to your message, press 2.
Okay, we're gonna shut off our phones too, although that was not me. Having a freeze up on this. Hang on. Okay, One of the things that happens in urban areas is as asphalt is installed in construction, there's concerns about air and water quality. There's concerns about soil quality. There's concerns about particulate. Impervious surfaces make a difference. It's less humid. It's harder to breathe. I'm going to ask everybody for this workshop to take a deep breath. Keep in mind that as we grow our cities, we're also growing farther away from our food at times. And so we think about this in terms of lands access. We think about this in terms of the ability to grow healthy food. But growing food in cities is not easy. Folks have a lot of underlying situations to deal with. Their socioeconomic status, whether one can work an 8-hour day or a 14-hour day is a real key concern. Heat stress is another. Climate change, as time goes on and fires, pandemics, floods often impact humans. They impact those with the least resources the most. And so our health and our well-being is connected very much with the ecosystem and ecosystem services as well. I want to introduce Aaron de la Cerda. Aaron grew up in the San Joaquin Valley and operates a community-supported agriculture operation and farm in the Fresno area. He learned to grow food where he grew up and then taught and worked with his family and those in his neighborhood to help others to learn to grow food as well. He has an amazing heart and is the farm manager and educator with Acta Non Verba's Youth Farm Project in East Oakland. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Aaron. Don't hesitate to say next slide. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Rob. As you mentioned, Aaron de la Cerda, also the CSA program manager for Acta Non Verba. It's a big part of what we're doing right now. But before we go any further, I noticed that some people are already chiming in on the chat with where they are as far as native lands. It warms my heart to see that, but I do want to pause and for the panelists, we just want to say that we're going to give a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that we live and work in the stolen land of the Chochenyo and Muwekma territories of the Ohlone people, and we are committed as organizations and to advocating and supporting the return of these lands to its original stewards, and to honoring and amplifying the Ohlone people's continued presence on these lands, and to all who interact with our groups. I'll go ahead and drop in the chat a link where you can learn more about, if you're in the Bay Area, you're likely on Ohlone land. But with that, so as Rob mentioned, we're talking about public land access and just what it looks like for the urban farmers. So it's frequently challenged by like agency rules and structures that can sometimes make the simplest things difficult in day-to-day operations. Rules set up for the public, for the public accessing open spaces and parks, housing authority, and transportation lands can limit urban farmers' success in their mission of growing food for healthier communities. So often urban farmers find ways to succeed almost in spite of the barriers placed by agencies owning the lands on which we operate. So this panel will discuss the challenges and the successes of how people and just local groups have used different approaches to land access as new farmers growing food on the path towards food sovereignty. It's really important for our communities. The urban farm panelists will tell their stories. They're going to share the processes for gaining public land access, and then the things they wish they had known, like when they first started, and then also coordinating formal or informal partnerships to access those public lands. So I also want to ask the audience if you want to drop in the chat if you were operating, or if you're in the realm of urban farming or volunteering of any sort, what type of public lands are you working on? Is it a school, a park, maybe housing authority, transportation, utility, or maybe there's another type that we haven't mentioned or that we're not able to cover? So go ahead and let us know in the chat. And I'll look forward to checking those out in a little bit and see where we're all coming from. So now I want to introduce some of our panelists. So we have a pretty dope group of people. So we have Ray Hartz with the Healthy Hearts Institute, Cahill Versailles from Moving South Berkeley Forward, Art Levine, he's representing Huerta del Valle, and of course myself, I'll be speaking for Act Nonverbal Youth Urban Farm Project, and maybe touch a little bit on the De La Tierra CSA out of Fresno. So I'm gonna let the panelists introduce themselves a little bit more, and yeah, and we'll get started with asking some questions. So why don't we go ahead and start with Ray.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I'm Ray Hartz, and I'm the founder and executive director of Healthy Hearts Institute. Before I dive into my pathway into land access, I really wanted to acknowledge each of my fellow panelists, including Rob Bennington. It's an honor to be on this panel with you guys. I really admire the work each one of you are doing. And, you know, over the last couple of days, we've talked, and just heightens my admiration and gets me focused on what's necessary for us to change some of these systemic oppressive behaviors. And so I really want to acknowledge you guys and thank you all for doing the work each of you are doing in your communities. I also want to talk a little bit about Healthy Hearts and what we do, and how I ended up starting Healthy Hearts, and then I'll get into my process for accessing land. Healthy Hearts is a 501c3. We focus on 4 key elements of health, which is stress management, nutrition, fitness, and environmental sustainability. In 2017, Rob, if you can go to the next slide. In 2017, we acquired or got access to this property that you see on the bottom right corner. It's almost a 2-acre property. And that's where we launched our community garden. If you can go to the next slide, Rob. And it shows what this property looked like when we first went out there. And you can see there's a shopping cart there. This land was vacant for over at least 15 years or more. And it used to be an exercise track around this property. And you can see that there's a backstop where we used to play baseball as a kid. I grew up in this community. And so, you know, having this access to this property was super important for me, but also for the community. So that's where we started at, and we cut down this grass that grew up to like 5 feet tall and got it all down. Next slide, Rob. And after we cleared this property, we went ahead and built these 10 beds. This is what we started with. And, you know, it was an interesting thing. I'm not a farmer. I didn't grow up growing food. And so this was a learning experience, just jumping into knowing that if there's a need for food access in this community and just doing something about it and just diving in and saying, hey, I'm going to take on this effort and make this happen. And so we started with these 10 garden beds and grew an in-ground plot. We've averaged about 4,000 pounds of produce annually out of just this section here. So that's how we started. And that happened in 2017. In 2018, we started our first health and wellness classes, which was 2 8-week mind body skills group classes that focused on meditation, self-expression, and autogenic training. We did 2 10-week organic gardening and environmental sustainability class. We taught the community about how to use tools, how to identify bugs, good bugs, bad bugs, carbon sequestration, and it reducing our exposure to toxic chemicals through food and household products. We also held an 8-week ecotherapy class that really resonated with the community because we got them outdoors and helped them to make the connection between nature and their food, thinking about food as medicine, and just being around nature and seeing how nature can reduce your stress levels, just the smell of flowers, or putting your hand in soil, the act of harvesting food, all those things are has been shown to reduce stress. So those are some of the classes that we had. We also did a 6-week nutrition and cooking demonstration class, taught people how to read nutritional labels, and how to create healthy diets using local organic food, and how to cook healthy meals. And so those are the classes. That's really what we center on, is creating a holistic atmosphere for folks in the El Pueblo community. That's in Pittsburgh. It's a low-income housing development located in Pittsburgh, California. Our vision is really to build a space where people can create a culture of healthy hearters, what I call healthy hearters. And these are people who have regular meditation or mindfulness or spiritual practices. They make conscious decisions to reduce their environmental footprints. They compost, they recycle, they use less household chemicals, they conserve water, they buy locally sourced food, etc. These are folks who live active lifestyles, meaning they exercise, they walk, they hike, they volunteer in their communities. And there are also people who consume healthy diets. So we want to create this space where people, like-minded people, can gather, who care about the earth, who care about their health, who care about each other and their communities. And when they're at our space, organic conversations about change, things that we care about can happen because these are like-minded people. We want people to be socially connected and focused on how to make the world better. And so, yeah, this is a harvest that we had from I think this was last year, where we harvested this was about 500 pounds of different produce from the community garden. Wanted to talk a little bit also about why I started Healthy Hearts. This is a question that I get asked all the time. The short answer is I wanted to start a business around my passion for health and wellness, which I developed as a young kid. And I remember my dad returning home from the county jail, and he used to be built like a superhero, and he'd show off his muscles, and make his chest jump up and down, and grab on the stop signs, kick his feet out like a flag. And I wanted to be like him. And I remember him telling me, like, I had to do push-ups. So at probably 5, 6 years old, I was doing push-ups with my foot off on a chair. And it just reminded me, as I got older, it was like, man, I've been thinking of health since I was a kid. And I also remember, like, almost every home in my neighborhood had fruit trees or gardens in their yard. And you'd always see someone's mom or grandmother on the weekends, like really like shucking corn and snapping peas and cleaning greens. There was always like an abundance of food. And these were good times. Like people in the community, laughed, kids are outside playing. It was just a good time, abundance of produce and a healthy community. And that's what I remember as a kid. And as I got older, I seen all this disappear. Like people, from my neighborhood weren't gardening anymore, or kids weren't outside anymore. Like, so this culture of health and wellness like disappeared. And so I wanted to bring it back to my community. The longer answer to how I started Healthy Hearts is more complex, and it's rooted in the enslavement of my ancestors. It's rooted in systemic racism and a lack of access to resources. but that's a longer topic. And I'll forgo that but I do want to call out like white supremacy because it definitely impacted my decision to build a healthy arts. It created communities like El Pueblo, like it created these low income communities across the country. And so I wanted to call that out because, that's something that I feel we shouldn't just gloss over. There's issues today that still arise from this level of white supremacy. And so I just really want to call that out, acknowledge that I'm aware of some of these things that create the barriers to land access and whatnot. So where we are today is because of COVID, we're not doing our classes. We are focusing more on the garden and the farm where people can come out and volunteer. We just launched, next slide, Ron. We started our farm area. We got an irrigation in. So, we're trying to grow food on this entire almost 2 acres of property. So, we can feed more folks and hopefully we can get our produce to market for the first time. So that's kind of where we're at. And I want to transition to talk about my experience and how I got land access, which everyone is here for. And so, my pathway was on a surface level was pretty simple. I approached the housing authority, the local project manager there, property manager there, and just told them about what I wanted to do with the property. I saw a need, and I felt like, it'd be a good place to do it. And luckily for me, they approved it. So that was a pretty simple process, but there was a lot of work that went into that prior to approaching them. And that was like developing relationships with, being on the steering committee of a local health and wellness collaboration of different stakeholders in the community, developing a relationship with local funders and elected officials. All those things, kind of like those relationships, really helped give me credibility and vetted my work. So when I went to the housing authority, I went there also with the backing of a group of folks who saw the need as well. And so the housing authority said yes. And this is like from the time I submitted my proposal till the time I got approved, it's like a 2-week process. It was fairly quick. But those relationships, I was able to leverage those relationships, even with like the UC Master Gardeners, Resource Conservation District, and the UC Cooperative Extension. Like having those partners with me was super helpful in getting this project going. So yeah, that was really my experience with getting access to this property. It's a good thing. I think that, more land needs to be made available, especially in low income communities. And I'm happy to be here and to talk about some of the challenges and barriers as well that we've had to get this thing going. So thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Ray. It's beautiful work, and I especially love what really resonates with me, just the idea that you're having those organic conversations with folks around you, to move this forward. Like that's, yeah, I like that. Just want to put that in there. All right, so next up we'll have Csa Is. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about, where you're working and just what your story is.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And I just want to echo a lot of what you're saying, Ray, resonates with not just my project, but from hearing the other panelists before, almost everything. So I'm very grateful to be in this space, not just to talk about my own project, but mostly to learn from you all. And yeah, so like Aaron mentioned, my name is Cahill, and I'm with the Berkeley Community Gardening Collaborative, and I'm working on a community project as the project coordinator for moving South Berkeley forward. But before I get into that, I just want to give you a little bit of my background. I feel like it helps to kind of ground us into where we are. Yeah, that's good, Rob. So I grew up in an urban area in South Sacramento, and I was really disconnected from how food was grown. Like I had never seen a garden or a farm, and I remember coming to college, and the first time I saw Brussels sprouts growing, I was so shocked and taken aback. Like I didn't know what things looked like, and that's, you know, unfortunately, that's not an unusual thing for a lot of youth that grow up in urban areas. And so I studied nutritional science because I've had a passion for health, and I had originally thought I wanted to go into the medical field. But just where I grew up, this disconnection from the land and food, you know, there's also the disconnection between like your own health. And I saw a lot of health disparities within my own family and my community. And so that's just what really where my passion for community health stems from. Yeah, and so this is right here is the Santa Fe right-of-way. And so moving South Berkeley forward, we're essentially a youth-led community project to create a greenway and urban garden in South Berkeley. And so the land that we're focused on, that's what the map is showing here, is the Santa Fe right-of-way, which was an old railway that actually ran from Point Richmond to Oakland, crossing diagonally through South Berkeley. And so it's a 3.1 mile stretch of land that the city of Berkeley acquired in 1977. Before that, I want to backtrack a little bit about why we're focused in South Berkeley. Because glad to see, I was looking at some of the chat that there's a good amount of people in the Bay Area and Berkeley. So as you guys probably know, Berkeley strives for progressive policies, but there still are health disparities along racial lines within the city. And so South Berkeley is where you see the most diversity, the lowest median annual income levels, highest rates of metabolic disease, and concurrently the least amount of green space. And so that's really why our focus is there. And our entire project is really centered on health and educational equity. And so now getting back into the land. So like I said, the Santa Fe right-of-way was a previous railway. The city acquired the land in 1977. And some additions were made. So if some of you know Cedar Rose Park and Strawberry Creek Park, those were two additions that were made onto the land after the city purchased it. And then there was also an affordable housing community built on the southern end of it. And so after all these additions were being made to the land, it was really the work of a lot of local activists and residents that pushed the city to pass a measure that mandated that all remaining open space on the Santa Fe right-of-way be preserved as such. And so in our goal of establishing this community garden, we're fortunate that the city is already on board and committed through this measure to having this be open space. And so I just want to also say, before moving South Berkeley forward was formed in 2017, there's also been other groups interested in the Santa Fe right-of-way because the city has had this property since the 70s. And so around 2010 and 2011, there was a group, a 5-member group between university partnerships as well as community collaborators that had worked with the Parks Department to get the proper permitting for a community orchard. That's what the residents came together and wanted. And so got the proper permitting, and they did soil testing, and they found that there was arsenic in the soil. And so that was a big halt. Once the city found out about the contamination, they fenced off the parcels, and it has been unavailable. This land has been unavailable to the community since. And that arsenic was there because the previous railway sprayed arsenic to get rid of gophers that would dig holes and damage the rail beds. So that's how that contamination got there, unfortunately. And so when Moving South Berkeley Forward was first started in 2017, it was originally piloted as a joint project between UC Berkeley, Berkeley High School, and the Berkeley Community Gardening Collaborative. And so the original funding for the project came from a chancellor grant, which basically gives funds for university community partnerships. And so the goal of Moving South Berkeley Forward is, okay, yeah, this area is set aside as open space, but knowing that South Berkeley is the most diverse and has residents who maybe have the least access to health resources, we want to make sure that this community gets what it needs to be able to be empowered over their own health and take control, whether it be through growing food and having access to healthy produce, but also just having a space where you can go and feel like you belong and you're safe, and a home that's kind of rooted somewhere, you know? And so who we are now, because our project has kind of transformed over the years, but right now we are still a collaboration between Berkeley High. So we focus on mentoring Berkeley High students of color, as well as UC Berkeley mentors, also students of color. And we're still with the Berkeley Community Gardening Collaborative. And we have a fiscal sponsor. So we don't have 501c3, but our fiscal sponsor is the Ecology Center. And so the point of involving the students, especially students of color, these are all students that are from South Berkeley. They're born and raised in this community. And so we focus on two things. One is education, because we want the students ultimately to be the voices for their own community and to give them the backgrounds and the histories and the vocabularies to be able to express themselves when they're going to talk to city council or the parks department, or just going out and talking to the community about making this project happen. So some of the things that we've focused on with meeting with the students are different environmental science topics, a lot of similar things to what your classes are centered around, Ray. So like nutritional science and soil health, regenerative agriculture practices. Most recently, we had a presentation on the climate crisis and the role that urban green spaces can play environmentally in improving environmental health. But also environmental justice, because this soil is toxic, and for it to be sitting in this neighborhood where you see the most Black and brown families, this is an environmental justice issue. And our students understand that. And that's really why they stay with the project, because they're passionate about it. And that's why Moving South Berkeley Forward is really, it's there to be able to give equitable access to the community. And so currently where we're at today, also COVID has impacted our ability to meet with the students. I'm sorry, Rob, you could probably do the next slide. Forgot about those. Okay, yeah. So here are some of our students. We, at the start of, I want to say in October last year, we were still meeting with the students with masks outside. This is at a garden, BYA, Berkeley Youth Alternative Garden, that thankfully they let us come in, use their garden space to meet with students. But now we've transitioned into Zoom, which is still nice. We can still meet with the students and they get this education. And another big part of our project right now is collaborating. I know you mentioned a lot, Ray. What has helped with securing access is these partnerships, which I think is going to be a big key theme in everything we're talking about. But really the partnerships. So we have been collaborating with the city council. So that was one barrier that we had to cross, was to actually get my position as the project coordinator funded. Because for a while it was, you know, you have to, I would do this work for free, I would, but you know, we all have to live. somehow. So thankfully, the city got on board and my position is funded and I'm able to continue doing this work. But also recently, we've been partnering a lot with the City of Berkeley Parks Department. And so Parks has been really key in helping us write grants for the development of the green space, because the cost of writing a grant for soil excavation and replacement for 4 to 6 plots of land is very expensive. And so it has to go through the city and through the Parks Department. And they're actually working on right now a grant for Prop 68, which is part of the California statewide parks program, which helps to establish parks in underserved communities. And so that grant is going to be focusing on the development of 4 parcels. So you could go next slide, please. Yeah. So up on the top, those are some of the current, these were taken last year, but more or less how some of the parcels look right now. So as you can see, fenced off from the city. There's a do not enter sign because the residents know that the soil is contaminated, and it's a really big issue, and it shouldn't, I don't think it should just be sitting here like it has been for decades. And here on the bottom portion, this is actually was put together by the Prop 68 grant writers as a potential green space design for the area. And so as you can see, we had the idea of flanking, because it is a linear path, flanking the sides with trees that can help capture particulate matter and air pollution, kind of help with the urban heat island effect you were mentioning, Rob. And so there's just so much opportunity for this green space, not just in individual health and wellness, but for the environment and for the greater community overall. And so this Prop 68, there's going to be a meeting this Saturday. I think it's on the next slide too. So for some of you who are in Berkeley, or maybe if you're even in South Berkeley, this is going to be a meeting that's over Zoom this Saturday, and we're going to be talking about this green space design, and if anyone has any other tips on placement of the garden or different things like this, that's what we're going to be hashing out this Saturday. So really encourage you all to go and support. But yeah, I look forward to talking more about the rest, but I'll just leave it here.
Okay, well, thank you, Cahill. Beautiful work. And it looks like you guys have a pretty dope design in mind. So I'm excited to see that, continue to grow. All right, so next we'll hear from Arthur Levine. Art, he's with Huerta del Valle, and I'll let him take it from here.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be with you all, and I just want to reflect Ray and Cahill's sentiments as well, of really being honored and so thankful and grateful to be here. Also wanted to thank Rachel Searles, who I know is on the call or on the webinar, just for inviting me and reaching out, and it's really great to have been able to build that relationship over the years. First and foremost, before anything else, I also want to make a land recognition. So I'm in Southern California, and the work of Huerta del Valle is occurring on stolen Tongva Chumash land and Chumash land, and also some of the areas that we work in are Cahuilla land. And I also wanted to recognize the transition of a Tongva elder, Barbara Drake, who transitioned earlier in 2020, and who donated all of her books. She's like this endless wisdom of native plants, of medicinal plants, of herbology, of native wisdom from her people, and has always shared. And in that spirit of sharing, and particularly sharing knowledge and connection to the soil and to the plants and to the land, I just want that spirit of sharing to inhabit all of us, in this process and for the rest of the panel, and recognize that she donated all of her books to the Robert Redford Conservancy, where I now work. So just to be upfront, I worked at Huerta del Valle from about 2013 to 2021, stepped away from Huerta del Valle this year, but Huerta del Valle is still extremely active. I encourage you all to check them out, huertadelvalle.org. Check out the Instagram. And Huerta del Valle is currently in a couple of fundraising processes right now. One is to build these really cool sustainable architecture buildings that they've been working on. They just got approval from the city to move forward with it. So they're fundraising for that. Check it out. They're fundraising for building out a farm in San Bernardino. And then they have a really amazing farmer training program. So for folks who are interested in learning how to farm, who are in the Southern California area or want to come down, just engage with them. So that's a little pitch for Huerta before I get started. I want to recognize a couple of things just to kind of set the stage as Ray was bringing up. And I'll quote Dr. Karen Spiller from University of New Hampshire, who in a recent webinar basically shared, in her analysis, colonization has everything to do with the food system and is the beginning of land theft, enslavement, continual racial oppression and economic oppression, continual mistreatment, exploitation of so many groups of people. And it's something we have to recognize, that Europeans came to this land, stole it, and started to grow food here. And then went to the African continent and stole people and brought them here in the Caribbean and North America and South America to grow food, to grow sugarcane, to grow cotton, to grow all kinds of fibers for making textiles, to grow tobacco, all of these industries that later made Europe and then continue to make the United States as a nation state, as a settler colonial nation, rich. And later, policies have been implemented to destroy food systems abroad, vis-a-vis NAFTA and other free trade agreements, et cetera, that have specifically destroyed food systems in other countries and contributed to humanitarian crises, immigration crises, and now millions and millions of immigrants are part of our country and are part of a labor force that is intentionally exploited to continue to preserve a capitalist system that otherwise cannot survive without worker exploitation. I'm just throwing that out there, but it has everything to do with the food system and why we fight. And it's not just about growing more food. We're not here just saying we need to grow more tomatoes, because frankly, there's more than enough food grown in this planet to feed everyone, even with a growing population. But really, this work that I think we're doing, and in particular, my understanding of it, is about building power. It's about growing food by and for the community on land that the community is able to steward and utilize and have self-determination over, et cetera. And I also want to just recognize, before getting deeper into this, that I myself come to this work as a person of privilege. So I am white, I am male, I speak English, I was born in this country, I have citizenship, my family has always been comfortable economically. And that's a huge deal, especially for any other white folks, any other economically privileged folks, educationally privileged folks, ability privileged folks, et cetera, language privileged folks on this call, to really stand up and recognize that privilege and ask yourself every day, especially as white folks, what can we do to utilize our privilege to build power with people of color, with indigenous communities, with folks who have been pushed off the land, exploited on land, who are descendants of slaves in this country, who have freed themselves and are trying to build power and frankly build a better nation for all of us. How do we use our privilege to build power with those folks? And that's been kind of the work that we've been working on at Puerto del Valle and my role. So I really want to share with you my pathway into this work. I have to thank my mother first and foremost, who was the first person to nourish me, of course, but also the first person to teach me about the significance of food in our lives. And also the first person to let me know that food is not just calories, it's a story, it's political, it's about the people who grow it and the people who make it, who so often are women, who so often are not recognized for their labor and their work and all of the love and energy that they put into us to allow us to live every single day. So I just want to thank her for that. I later had my eyes open when I in high school was able to take a trip to New Orleans, Louisiana, to support recovery work in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and was able to see, with all the curtains pulled to the side, what racism has looked like and continues to look like in our country, in particular in the Deep South, where you have the same economic level of communities, the only difference being white and black, and a completely different recovery process. And I'm talking about the lower Ninth Ward and the portions of New Orleans that were hit hardest by Hurricane Katrina, and seeing that just up the road, the white communities were already having their Walmarts back, their gas stations, their hospitals, and the majority Black communities looked like the hurricane came yesterday. And that really opened up my eyes to systemic inequality and to see the differences in the levees. These are these things that are supposed to protect us from floodwaters. The levee in the Black neighborhood was so thin, it's like you could push it over with your own hands. And the levee in the French Quarter, the tourist neighborhood, the place that people who don't even live there come to visit, was so big that you don't even know you're standing on it. You can stay in the hotel right on top of it because you don't even know it's there. And it's so massive. And just to see that those disparities are not by accident. They're based on decisions that were made by people, offices, typically men, typically white men, especially in the history of the city of New Orleans. So anyway, that really opened my eyes, but the question was then what can we do? And the actions that were being taken at that time that I began to really learn from was utilizing land to grow food. And that was really inspired me as a way to organize and address these systemic inequalities, systemic racism, environmental racism, economic racism, by utilizing what's under our feet in the soil. And so kind of moving into the work in Southern California, I came here in 2009 as a student to be a student at Pitzer College in Claremont. I didn't know anything about the Inland Empire, didn't know anything about its significance, but it's so significant for our work. Number one, because the climate in the Inland Empire, what's going on now, is probably how all of us are going to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, due to climate change. Hot, dry, certain things can't even survive. If you plant certain trees, they won't live. And we're trending towards that. Number two, it's a place where land is being lost at an alarming rate. And so just right here, I have a little picture of kind of the region, Southern California. It's a super significant region that you may not know about because 40 to 60% of goods that come in from overseas travel through the ports of LA and Long Beach. And then 40 to 60% of those goods go through the Inland Empire and then get out to retail. So all of your Amazon stuff, all your box store stuff, all that stuff is getting transported through here. It's part of a huge global economy. And to the right, you can see two images of the warehouse proliferation. These are these massive buildings where all of this stuff is stored. It's a storage economy. It's called the logistics economy. To the bottom left, you can see what the land used to look like, not necessarily recognizing what indigenous communities had the land looking like, but in the late 1800s, early 1900s, with agriculture, it was an entirely agricultural region, and now it's moving to an entirely logistics and housing region. Top right is one of the last farms. It's just being absorbed by land. So it's a super significant region. Next slide, please. So why does this matter? So all this productive land is being lost. The Central Valley is not necessarily a reliable source for food moving into the future. There's a huge percent of goods that are passing through these Inland Empire communities. Workers who work in the logistics industry struggle to find jobs that pay a living wage. Communities are struggling with high rates of chronic illness because of all the diesel pollution. LA Times, I think 2017, had an article that said that the intersection between the 15 and 60 freeways is the most polluted in Southern California because 40,000 to 60,000 diesel trucks pass there like every single day or week. I forget exactly. There's a ton of land still in the region. It's a soil-rich region. And like many parts of America, it's an extremely diverse community, which means that it's relevant to all of us. But 1 in 3 families in the Inland Empire is struggling to make ends meet. They have to choose between food, rent, electricity, other things like that. And these are two maps. The one on the left shows disadvantaged communities, and the one on the right shows the results of the Cal EnviroScreen from 2018, which kind of measures like soil, air health, water health, and all this kind of stuff. So these same areas that are disadvantaged economically are also disadvantaged environmentally. It's just overlapping and compounding. So my perspective and the perspective of Huerta del Valle is that the way land is being used in our community is making people sick, it's destroying the environment, and it's preserving poverty because those low-wage warehouse jobs are not uplifting our communities from poverty. Next slide. So in 2011, 2012, the City of Ontario, through the Healthy Ontario Initiative, got a grant from the Kaiser Permanente Foundation. And in that grant, students from the Claremont colleges wrote, let's do a community garden. And once the city got the grant, they were kind of saddled with the responsibility to do a community garden. And so they were like, oh, we have to actually do this. And they reached out to the collaborative effort of Huerta del Valle, which is a group of community members, not even a nonprofit at that point, Pitzer College, who was supporting them and supporting the work, and reached out and said, look, we need to do a community garden. Y'all are trying to do this. We have this land, we own it. We have this money from the grant. Can you help us get our goals met for the grant? Essentially as a contractor. And we said, yes, that's what we need. We had previously tried to do work on an abandoned school site, and it was really tough to do it on a school site. There was so much bureaucracy, so much red tape. And next door to the active school site, they were spraying Monsanto chemicals on the grass to keep the weeds down. Like they literally had a sign that said, you know, Monsanto on it, which was crazy. So we obviously couldn't be there. This was perfect. On the left is Karen Thompson, one of the biggest champions at the City of Ontario, Lucy Block, who worked for Pitzer at the time, and Maria Alonso, our founder and current director at Huerta del Valle, looking at this big piece of land and saying, what can we do? Once we got access to it, it was all about that. I was pulling my hair out. That's why I'm bald, because I pulled my hair out to try to get this land, and I was waiting for it. It wasn't like Ray's story. It was more like 10 months, 11 months of just waiting and waiting and waiting and negotiating. Anyway, short amount of time. We laid wood chips down. We let the people work the land. And before you know it, we had productive gardens. Yeah, next slide. And so just really quick, you can see on the left, it's what the plot used to look like. On the right is after a couple of years of development, same picture, just different sides. And you can see a little bird's eye view at the top of the empty lot and then their current active lot. Next slide. So really quickly, and moving into our next discussion, this is a model for the nation. This is public land being placed in public hands for public good, right? It's like, we have this land, we own it as a city or as an agency or whatever, you guys should use it and create good. And that's what we've done. The City of Ontario actually worked with us and we worked with them to write some policy. Previously, there was no policy in the City of Ontario to govern the implementation of gardens or community gardens. And so it was hard for them to say yes. It was easy for them to say no because there was no policy, but hard for them to say yes. Now that there's policy, anyone can show up to the City of Ontario who lives there and has a piece of land and say, and go through a simple administrative process to start new gardens. And these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other properties are other public properties that we have been able to access through county parks districts, and other partners. And I'm sure we're gonna have a chance to go into that. But to me, public lands in public hands for public good, and really connecting the people back to managing and stewarding lands in their own neighborhoods. And I think that's the last slide. Yeah, just really quick. I love this juxtaposition because behind you can see the parkland, right? It's like grass, it's a parking lot, it's manicured. And in your face is like this super biodiverse garden plot, right? And we have to start finding that look beautiful versus the other manicure and grass. We got to start prioritizing that biodiversity, food production, all this kind of stuff. And that's what we're going for.
Thank you, Art. And that is, I love that comparison there. Hearing you, especially when you were pointing out what's happening in the Inland Empire, Art, it reminded me of a quote from my all-time favorite farmer, because of course I have one, Masanobu Fukuoka. I don't know if y'all familiar. Definitely gotta look him up if you're not. Amazing human being. The world's at a loss without him. But he said, if we throw Mother Nature out the window, she comes back in the door with a pitchfork. And that's exactly what's happening. We see all the changes happening in our environment in so many ways. That's Mother Nature with her pitchfork. All right, so yeah, now I guess I'll share out a little bit about the organizations I've been working with. Primarily Acting on Verba Youth Urban Farm Project. So I've been managing the farms for A&V for just over 4 years now. Acting on Verba itself is, we just turned 10 last year. So we've been doing this work for a decade. Our founder and director, Kelly Carlisle, she really wanted to, just make a new normal for when she had a child. And so she went to work, just, putting it out there that like, I want to start a farm. I'm going to have kids, grow things, and they're going to sell it, and they're going to get that money, and then they're going to put that in their education. And she did exactly that. And so now we're at 3 farms. So we have our flagship farm. I think on the next slide, we'll see some images from our flagship farm in Tassafaronga Park. It's out in East Oakland, 83rd and E Street. So these are some of the youth. On the left side there, you'll see 3 of our older youth. So these young ladies are helping me prep the CSAs. We actually harvested and then packed the CSAs, and that's everything. That was when we were much smaller, and so we were growing everything that we distributed right there on that farm. And of course, my dog Whistler is looking longingly at their snacks. And on the right side, we'll see, I believe this picture was, we just finished unloading the truck with the after school program, and we're getting ready to go onto the farm for farm time. So this is our kind of like a solid little crew right here. They were, these are all the youth local to the Tassafaronga village, like in the area, and they were in our program, pretty regularly. So it's like my core group right there. But yeah, we started with Tassafaronga Farm, and then I started working with the group Wow Farm. They were another nonprofit game theory, and they kind of sunsetted their organization to move on to other things. They brought me on the tail end of that to help manage the farm with the youth. It was high school youth. And then when the owner of the land, who was also involved with that nonprofit, I guess you think you go one more, Rob, you'll see Wow Farm. He saw what we were doing. Oh, we're back to action number, but it's okay. But oh, there we are. So this is Wow Farm here. So it's a small 1/8 of an acre slice over in West Oakland, and it sits right below the BART track. So this is like getting you both views. I'm on one end of the farm looking towards the building, and then if I'm at the building, look, you turn around and you see the BART station. So we're kind of sandwiched in this very it's like the epitome of urban farming right here. So we're next to the post office, the BART tracks, an old abandoned building, and then on one side we do have neighbors. They're pretty darn awesome. But so the landholder at this place, it's been a farm for 20 plus years, and he wanted to keep it that way. He was moving away, and the organization was sunsetting. So he gave us access to the land. Pretty good deal, and this is the most secure land access that we have in the organization, and I'll touch a little more on that later. But this one we grow primarily salad greens because it's a small space, and we wanted to be able to kind of support itself and bring in some funds to support the kids programs and help them generate income for their accounts. And so everything on this farm, other than the fruit trees, of course, it's a 4-week turnaround on average. So it's a lot of mustard greens, and they got the kales and radishes, spinach, a lot of young crops that can be harvested young and quick. And we sell it only to either individuals or local restaurants and grocery stores. So no chains or anything like that. We want to keep our food local, and that's that's the system that we see working. And then after that, it was in between the two. I think if you go back one more, we'll see this is the A's farm. So the Oakland Athletics, they had reached out with a desire to fill this space. On the top right, you'll see that big empty space. That's what it looked like before. It was just a few tables were there. It was like a smoking section, basically. There's really a lot of dead space in their stadium, and they wanted to have a stronger connection to community and really just provide a space for us to show out what it is we do. And so we one of my partners and I, we got the privilege of designing the space. On the lower left, you'll see a rendering of the proposed project. They gave it the green light, and so they went ahead and built it. And so the other 2 pictures, you can see the top left and then the bottom middle are what the end product was. This was before the growing season really got going. We had just planted. And so it's since we've kind of rearranged, and that we've gone to more the agroforestry model, where you have a tree with, it's like the layered growing. So a tree, and under the tree is a shrub, and around the shrub are some herbs, kind of that style. And so now it has about 12 fruit trees growing in that space. It's a good amount of space. And on the very bottom right, you can see like during the games, we would open up, this is, the good times when we were able to gather. This is during the ball games. We would open up the space and have some of our young people there to show out what it is they were doing, because we regularly brought our after school program youth to the stadium to maintain it, to just hold lesson there, do farm to table cooking things. It was really just a space for them to get away from just the everyday farm, which was, Csa, but to kind of just see something a little different. And then during the games, show other kids, the broader East Bay community, what it is that we're doing. So this is really like a showcase farm, whereas Csa Viranga is like our outdoor classroom. It's like our like I said, a flagship farm, and then Wow Farm was our production farm. So A and B, like I should probably mention, our big mission, of course, this is in the food justice lens. We're trying to end food apartheid, and we're very adamant about the language we use. And we don't use the language of food desert, because as you may have heard me say in the past, deserts are natural, and what's happening with the inaccessibility of healthy fresh foods is not natural. That is by design. It's marginalization, it's remnants of redlining, it's historical, systematic racism. So we really like to point that out. So what we were trying to do is end food apartheid. And when I first came into this work, I was thinking like, all right, I'm just gonna like max out the farm's output, no till, like I'm gonna heal the soil while just optimizing output, and I'm gonna feed everybody. And very quickly, I was checked. I realized, like, even with the surrounding community, I cannot possibly produce enough to feed everybody. So I've completely had a paradigm shift to, I can't feed everybody, but I could teach everybody how food is produced and that they can feed themselves. Like, and if they don't have the means, like, we can help them find those means, and we can help educate them. So that's, what we've, well, I'll speak for myself, what I've since redirected the farms to. Like early on with the pandemic, and about this, let's see, we're in March now. Yes, about this time, when we received stay-at-home orders and there was a run on grocery stores, we had our CSA programming. We were serving about 8 to 12 families on average, and we saw that with the first week of stay-at-home orders, that ticked up to about 25. I try to meet the demand, and I harvested everything. And then, mind you, this is in the cool season when production is not as high. And I wiped out everything on my farm. I harvested absolutely everything I could. I was, planting things as I'm harvesting, trying to keep up with demand. Quickly realized, that's when I was really, I had already switched from production to education, like primarily, but then I really understood, okay, like there's no way that just these farms can meet the demand. Urban farms are not here to solve the food crisis, like alone. It needs to be done in partnership with so many more ways than just the farmers. And so what we ended up doing was, it was kind of perfect timing. Slow Food East Bay had reached out and with this idea of the Sister Farms project. They were working with some farmers in the Central Valley and the Central Coast area. So the Aberg farmers and the calf farmers. And so and those farmers, as we may know, is there was a lot of farm production going on, but with restaurants closed, there was no end user, so to speak, for that produce. So there was a lot of produce going, just being turned under, or just kind of going bad in the fields, because farmers had no outlets for, they had no access to market with everything shutting down. And so what we did was Slow Food East Bay connected us with these groups of farmers, and really helped, give us a head start by providing funding for transportation and, and donation of orders to like key communities who needed the food most. And we were able to start aggregating. So I went from trying to produce everything for our CSA for our normally 8 to 12, which turned into like 30 to 40 customers. And we were able to meet that demand week to week while still donating 15 to 20 shares to our Csa community. So it was a really dope model, and so we were able to meet the demand. it was a beautiful thing. And then we were also partnering, so it wasn't just Acton and Verba and Slow Foods East Bay and those farmers. There was O2AA was in, and I know forgive me, I am forgetting some farmers, but there was a group of us who were all purchasing from these farmers. And out of it, there was, we were able to sustain our CSA program and grow a whole lot more. Cecilia, who was the point person for driving the produce from the Central Valley and the Central Coast out here to Oakland, was able to start her own business, Yei Organic. So she works with a few farmers out in the Central Coast area now, and we're still working with her and those farmers. So out of this kind of chaos and need for a really quick pivot in the onset of the pandemic came this a more stable food system. So it's kind of people helping people to create something that works for people. It's been pretty dope. And then more recently, in August of last year of 2020, Acton on Verba took on the Beatbox. We inherited the Beatbox program, the CSA program from Fat Beats Produce. They were sunsetting their organization as well, but the Beatbox is still a very viable program, and there's a lot of supporters, a lot of community around that, and they really wanted to see it continue. And so they had reached out. We put in our RFP and our request for proposal, and we submitted one, and they decided it was a good fit. A lot of our just beliefs and mission aligned. So we took on the Beatbox program with the two beautiful staff members, Roya and Chicago. They were dope. They were actually so cool. They kept that program going, just volunteering for some weeks, if not months, just because they believed in it. So we brought them onto the team, and the Beatbox is still going strong, and we were able to provide produce not only the Beatbox community, but distribute produce out here in East Oakland and neighbors to all of our farms.
One quick question, Aaron. Can
Yes,
you
sir.
explain what a CSA is? Just so
Yes.
everybody knows? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm using lingo. I'm using jargon. Apologies. So CSA is it stands for Community Supported Agriculture, and traditionally community supported agriculture in the original sense of the word is I'm a farmer. I'm growing for the season, and y'all, my neighbors, my community, you want food. So I ask, okay, for this chunk of money up front, you pay me now, and it's kind of like investing in me as a farmer. And as a return, later on in the season, you will receive a share of my harvest. So that's why it's called CSA shares. So like I deliver shares to our customers. Now that's a traditional model, and we have what's called like a California CSA, where it's very much more. It's a little more like buying a product. So it's adjusted very much for like the urban lifestyle that a lot of us live. So like with our model, you can buy a share week to week, so you're not necessarily paying the farmer directly in bulk at the beginning of the season. You can pay by Monday, and you'll get one on Wednesday, pay by Thursday, you'll get one on Saturday type deal. And this is actually a really popular model in the urban setting, because as I mentioned, small urban farms can't produce enough outside of, you might be able to support the 8 to 12 key, families in your area. But in order to feed everybody, we need to reach out a little further to our larger family farms. So larger meaning, a few acres, not necessarily those 1,000-acre farms that have their own issues, but more so like, like I know Vang Farm is one of our partners, and they have, I just went out and I saw a few of I think they had 5 acres out in Merced, and then another 10 and then a few cities over. So those are the types of farms we need to bring in, for these food systems to really be viable in the urban setting. And lastly, I'll mention about Acton on Verba. So our whole thing is to have kids involved with every step of the process. So plan, plant, and harvest the produce. And now we've actually started a LIT program, stands for Leaders in Training. So as our youth, we're 10 years old, and as our youth, we're beginning to age out of our programming. Well, we didn't want to just be like, okay, well, you're 10 years old now, later, like that was fun. So we kind of just kept expanding our program to that way we're able to continue to embrace them. And so we started our leaders in training program. So that's our 11 to 16-year-olds. And they're actually sometimes at our North Oakland location at the Omni Commons where we pack our CSA. They're gaining like leadership skills. They're doing writing workshops. They're doing boat building to help build leadership and just like that interaction with creativity. But they help pack the CSA as well. So they're involved with that. 100% of the proceeds from our sales of CSA or any produce goes into their youth education accounts. And that's funds that's there to help those kids make sure they can engage fully in their education. Like in my experience coming up, there was times where I didn't bother bringing home that permission slip because it's like, I'm not gonna put my parent in that position of having to tell me no or break my heart or feel like they're breaking my heart because you know what, we can't afford that cost to go there. You know, there were 6 of us growing up. So, you know, we wanted those kids to be able to fully experience their education, whether it's tutoring or, you know, a guitar lesson, anything that's going to improve that, you know, themselves, anything that's educational for the kid, they can use those funds towards. And with us taking on the beatbox we're really making an impact with those, you know, those savings accounts. It's really dope. And then we have our after school program for the neighborhood for our local, you know, kids. So after school program right now, of course, is looking a lot different. A lot of it's virtual, and we offer virtual tutoring. There's sometimes we do cooking classes. So we offer different things online, but we are still able to do in-person things at our farm because in Tassafaranga, we do have a 1/4 acre. And so, you know, with good coordination, we're able to have kids come in waves. That way they can still be on the farm. They get that experience. They get to see a human being because they've been in front of the computer all day for school. And then during the school breaks, we have our Camp A and V. Last summer we made the quick pivot from, you know, normally we have this full production in person, 8-week long. There's two 4-week sessions of camp, and they do everything from farm to table cooking, photography, dance, like a lot of different things, but that just pivoted all online. And so we actually had a great success with that last year, just packing up camp in a box, sending it off, and then they tune in with a live instructor, and they're able to still get that full camp experience. But yeah, so that's kind of all of what AMV is doing. So, okay, I'll wrap that up. I'll stop there. But all right, so we're gonna move on to some of the questions we had for our moderators. We want to start talking about land access because you know, so the panelists and myself, we have all been speaking the past few days trying to identify what were some of the challenges, and it seems that we all have a very unique challenges when it comes to like accessing land, whether that's public, private, or otherwise. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask the moderator. So what have you learned from your like past efforts to secure land? Like, what are some of the barriers that you've encountered, and how have you addressed them? So let's see. I will go with let's go with Ray. Do you mind sharing with us what have been some of those barriers? I guess let me be clear. One, what type of land are you working on? What are some of the barriers, and how have you tried to address them, or have you been able to?
Yeah, so I'm on land that's owned by the Contra Costa County Housing Authority, which is interesting because they're governed by the urban housing for urban development HUD, right? And so the housing authority has to work within the parameters laid out by HUD. So if HUD says you can only do 1-year land use agreements because we don't want to tie up our property, then the housing authority isn't allowed to enter a long-term land use agreement, which is super problematic if you're a farm. Like if you wanted to grow avocados, right, at your farm, that's a 5-year process. All right. If you wanted to have asparagus, that's a few years process. So you need access, long-term access to this property if you want to build out a robust farm. That's just on the growing side. On the funding side, that's problematic because if you can't tell your funders, hey, I'm going to be here for a few years, can I apply for a long-term grant, a multi-year grant? And so if you can't assure your funders that you're going to be on that property for a few years, how do you apply and confidently and, for a multi-year grant? And those grants, multi-year grants are larger typically, right? If you want to do a $1 million grant, you want to be able to say, hey, I'm going to be here 3 years, 4 years or whatever. And so that's super problematic, just not having long-term land use agreement on a growing side and the funding side. The other issue is like if you don't own a property, you also have to work within the parameters of infrastructure, right? Can you build on that property? If you looked at some of the photos I had, like that land is super flat. It's in Pittsburgh. It gets over 100 degrees during the summer. There isn't any shading. So if people come out to volunteer or work in a garden, like if it's 100 degrees, you get up early, but you're not going to hang out there. You're going to do what you got to do and you're going to leave, right? And this is not what we want for the community. We want them to be able to access this space. So if they go out to the garden, we want them to be able to sit under the shade, right? Drink some lemonade, like read a book, like walk around the track, like so, not having been able to build on that property, to provide shade, to provide a cooking demonstration, an outdoor kitchen, like these things are super problematic. Another thing is like electricity. Like we got 2 acres, almost 2 acres, and if we want to farm, you need electricity to run an irrigation system. You need a greenhouse. You need a refrigeration unit. Like this takes electricity, and if you can't access those utilities, then you really don't have a robust farm. So just thinking in those terms, how do we circumvent those barriers? What do we do to go around it? That's a difficult question because, some strategies to say, hey, let's write a petition. Let's make enough noise to upset them, like to make them do it. Let's force them to do it. But at the same time, like you want to be respectful and grateful that you are on this property. Like I've been on this property for almost 4 years now. They didn't have to approve it in the first place, right? And they did. So I'm super grateful for that. But it's also like, hey, like there's more work to be done. Like let's get to this next level. Let's get to the root of the issues and iron out those issues so the community can get the help and resources that they need. So those are pretty much the challenges and barriers.
Thank you, Ray. So yeah, that sounds like a tough position to be in, and I can definitely relate with. You want to, like as you said, you can raise a ruckus and you can get like people rallying behind you, but at the same time you risk your ability to be there. So it's like, how do you reach that critical mass of like public outcry for like this is what we need, this is what we want, without alerting the powers that be, the landholders to what you're doing, and then just booting you before you're able to get to that point. So that's a good point. That's just really, and I can relate because at Csa, we have a bit of a handshake agreement with Oakland Parks and Rec about our presence there. So I completely am in parallel with how you're feeling, or maybe not how you're feeling, but the situation that you're in. All right, let's see. Do we have? I'll pause and see if we have any questions from our audience for Ray regarding some of the challenges or solutions. All right. Well, okay. I have some questions, but I'll circle back to those. So Cahill, do you want to share some of Like, what are the specific challenges unique to your situation, and any proposed solutions at the moment?
Yeah, and I'm just looking at Richie, your question in the chat about urban soil remediation. That kind of goes off because I would say our biggest barrier with the Santa Fe right of way is the soil contamination, because like I said, the city is already on board and committed to it being an open space. And if the soil hadn't had this contamination, I feel like there would have been progress already. It would have just been a matter of getting the permits. And there's been interest in the community and community groups. And so I'll just share something that has happened in 2013 when the first community orchard was trying to happen. They tested the soil and found arsenic. There was actually a field study, a phytoremediation field study that happened on the Santa Fe right of way. And so that was out of the Pollute Lab through UC Berkeley's soil science. And so that went from 2013 to 2017, and it was led largely by Sarek Matson, who's working on his dissertation, studying the ability of Chinese brake fern which can naturally hyperaccumulate arsenic from the soil. And so he was studying what types of amendments, whether it be different fertilizers or mycelium added, can maximize the uptake of arsenic from the soil. It's a really cool project, really interesting. And I actually worked in that lab with him, processing some of the soil samples. And so very interesting project, but the results from that, they found that the time scale that the fern to fully remediate the soil would be on the scale of decades to accumulate all of the arsenic. And like I said, it's really an equity issue at this point because the community has already been waiting decades for this land to be utilized. So asking this community to wait, decades more just to get the soil cleaned up, like that's just not acceptable. And so that's why the approach now has been approaching the Parks Department, like in the case of the Prop 68 grant, to include costs for excavation and replacement with clean soil. And we've had some discussions in the past of people saying, well, why don't you just do raised beds, if the soil's toxic? But that's also problematic because, as anyone knows who works with young kids, like I have a niece who's 1 year old, she just eats soil. She just will eat dirt. So you don't want to have a space where you're going to have kids and families and community and still have exposure to, these toxins that are very detrimental to your health in the long term. So yeah, I would say that's the biggest barrier, and how we've addressed that is, again, through partnerships, working with the city and with the Parks Department. And we actually, before I came on board with the project in the first year, part of moving South Berkeley forward was educating the Berkeley High students on methods to sample the soil. So, turning it into a learning opportunity where students get, they would fully put on the overalls and the boots and get the augers and take these soil samples, which was a lot of hard work. And that was also in partnership with UC Berkeley. So they're getting this training in environmental science, but we've kind of transitioned away from the soil sampling because of the pandemic, and also the Parks Department is willing to include the cost for excavation into the grants, which has been really great. And then I would just say one other thing, the next barrier, like I said, that this space is preserved as open space, but we're concerned about the equitable access. And so something that our project director, Corinne Haskins, who's also the director of the Gardening Collaborative, she very, very much stresses that in the community garden, we don't want to see garden plots. We don't want to see garden plots. We want it to be open space, similar to the Gill Tract, like we mentioned before. because all of the gardens in the city currently in Berkeley have a 2-year waiting list because they're limited by how many plots are available. And so naturally that's not inclusive. That's not what we're trying to do. So really fighting for open space and partnering with city and parks to get soil remediation into these larger grant budgets have been our major approach.
Thank you, Cahill. To jump in, just one question. There are many farming models, CSA, farmers markets, community gardens, etc. Which is the most sustainable or accessible for someone just getting started? Do you need those plans? I think the person is referring to maybe the plans that Ray was mentioning. You need those plans in place to get the land already before digging in.
Yeah, and I guess to that question, I don't know that there's any like correct answer. I'd say you'd have to really check in with your community, like having a core group of folks who are committed to getting the project off the ground, and see what the need is. Is it a need for food, for like secure food access, so like a CSA model, which includes distribution? Or is it simply the desire to be outdoors, to align yourself with more healthy living model? So a more healthy style of living, like the holistic healing, like what Ray's doing? Or is it simply just, working in community to enjoy open lands? So I'd say it really depends on what the need of the local community is before you're able to answer that. Because I've noticed, like between Ray, Cahill, Art, and myself, we all have very different approaches, in our missions. While generally aligned with food justice, we all took very different approaches to how it's being, how we're carrying out our mission. But it's because we've all the common thread is, just working with the community, starting there, like what is it that we need, what is it we want, and what are we able to do? So I'd say, like, answer, if you're able to find a group of people local to where it is you're at and answer those questions, I feel like you'll be able to find the right first step for you. But then to go back to Rob's point, then you want to come up with that plan. Once you're able to answer those questions, come up with that plan, like ideate what does it look like to really build this out, and then approach, then you can begin approaching and pitching the idea, and just kind of putting it out there. And I'm almost certain, you're going to get a bite with, somebody interested in supporting, kind of snowball from there. And then I just wanted to mention real quick something Cahill said with not wanting the plots. It reminds me of yesterday's private land. The panelist, one of the, forgive me, I forget his name, but I'm sorry, her name, and she was just speaking about how we got to reframe how we approach land, and the idea of ownership. And I think that's, that just really resonated with me, that not wanting the plots, because then people become protective in the wrong way. I'd say, like, this is my plot, grow your veggies over there, I'm growing mine here. Like, it becomes this level of exclusivity, and it just reinforces that very capitalist, individualistic mindset of our relationship to land. Whereas it feels that what I'm getting from everybody's story on the panel today is that we're working in community. We're building this together, not so that I can say I have a farm and I manage this land and I grew this food. It's we did this, like we wanted this and we have this. So I just want to point that out. I really like that, and that's something that I wanted to bring forward because I'm hearing that in everybody's stories. But thank you again, Cahill, for sharing that. And I would also, on one last thing, is really be interested and to put the ask out there, because I've done soil tests on one of my farms in the past, but it's been some years, and that was before we started a phytoremediation project. So I guess pause there. Phytoremediation is simply healing the soil. We're trying to remove toxins and improve soil quality. A lot of times it's like, as Cahill mentioned, arsenic, nickel, lead, the common heavy metals that are found in urban environments. And it's using plants to draw them out of the soil That's kind of it's a very long road, but it's kind of letting nature work for you, opposed to having to completely take out all the soil and replace it, which can be very costly. So anyway, I would be very interested, Cahill, to connect with some of the students who are able to do testing, and kind of bring that to each of the farms just to see where the soil is at, because I think it's been a minute since we've done that. But we can touch base offline.
Hey, Aaron, what were some of your barriers at Csa with A&V?
So good question. So right now, as I mentioned briefly, so with Csa Faranga, the Csa Faranga farm that's in East Oakland, our flagship farm, is a 1/4 acre at the corner of a park, and we have this kind of handshake agreement with OPR around our presence there. So the challenge, it's just knowing that we have security. Like Ray mentioned, if I want to grow avocados, that's not a 1-year turnaround. I can't throw a pit in the ground today and tomorrow, next year I get an avocado. No, you're in it. You plan, as farmers, we're thinking, 3, 5, 10 years down the line with what my land's going to look like, how it will produce, and what the soil health is going to be like. So when we don't have secure land access, like we're not guaranteed that we will be here in 5, 10, 2 years even. It makes it really hard to go all in and invest to really, not that we are not putting everything in, but it just kind of, we're jumping in, but with that thought in the back of our mind that like, man, I hope this works out. Because you don't want to spend so much time with planning, making your plan B. That takes away from your plan A. So like at Csa, we don't have a legal document saying that like you have guaranteed access to this land for this set amount of time. That's a challenge. We do have water access. It's not on the farm. It's just outside of the farm, which it presents a bit of a challenge because of where we're at and just the nature of things. We can't leave the water connected, so that way I can't have a timer. I'd love to get a battery operated timer to run my drip, but we can't do that because just the way that the water access is, I have to have a water key and hook that up by hand each day. And so that presents its own challenge because just paying somebody to go out there and do that. I think Art mentioned, or maybe in the days past, but just compensate. One big challenge across all of our projects is compensating people for their time, and so that's a challenge of just watering, like the most basic need for farms. We have water, but maintaining access to that water when we're not physically present, and then we also don't have electricity at any of our farms. Well, actually the A's farm does, of course, it's at the stadium, but that's not a major production farm, and that's like more of a showcase, and we have limited access there. I'll get to that in a second. But so electricity at Csa and Wow, we're able to farm and do amazing things, but completely without electricity. When we want to have events at either farm, I gotta run it from our office across the street from Csa. I gotta get 2 extension cords, run it across the street, and then make sure I don't blow a fuse by, because I'm running 100 feet of electrical cord, and then make sure I'm powering the smallest devices. So that's a challenge. We have started a project with some solar panels. By now that we got those things, we got a solar panel, I should say, and one deep charge battery about 3 years ago. And by now those things are super outdated. I had an electrician come by and he looked at the system. He was helping me troubleshoot because my battery wasn't charging, and he's like, yeah, no, there's no way this panel is going to charge that thing, especially when you're not like, I have to drag the panel out each day, so that's another challenge. It's like, we have we're trying to build capacity, but there's a challenge of not having that solar panel mounted and up permanently, because again, we have limited access, and the agreement for the land is very tentative. And then with the A stadium, because it's their property, it's not, we don't have like a lease agreement, so to speak. It's just they basically pay us as contractors to maintain the space. They grant access, but any changes, improvements, alterations, that has to kind of be in line with what they envision. for their stadium. So there's another challenge there. And then while I might be able to bring staff on and our after school program kids and, you know, pre-pandemic times, outside of a pandemic, we were able to go in person. And it's great. The kids love it. They get to run around the, you know, in the bleachers. They get to sit there in the empty stadium, feeling like, you know, they're just royalty. But now we're, you know, now that's a problem. And even before the pandemic, we weren't able to bring large community groups regularly outside of just having, you know, outside of when there's games. So even if there's no game going on, we want to be able to bring in all of our community when that might be a little more challenging, just logistically for, you know, on the A side. So, and then last thing, Wow Farm, we've been really fortunate. We were leasing directly from the person who legally owns the land, you know, it's legal by law. And so he's been really dope with, you know, working with us. He wants to keep the land farming, doesn't want to see it developed or anything. So on that end, we've been really fortunate. We have water access, you know, we have the garbage, you know, because of course being the urban environment, that's an ongoing thing. We're constantly getting dumping on all of our farms. But now the threat most recently is next door, as you saw in the pictures of the Wow Farm earlier, there was that brick building in the background. So that's an old mechanic. It was a mechanics building, and before that, it was a dry cleaning, I believe. So a lot of toxic chemicals going on there. Luckily, it's been contained, but now it's been recently sold to a contractor who I've met and spoke with, but is very unsure about what they want to do. But the past few owners, that property has changed hands multiple times in the 3 years that I've been working with WOW, or working that land. And each time the person purchases that little lot with that building with the intent to tear that down or to renovate it and build up. So you might not have got the orientation from the picture, but that building sits south of our farm. And so if they build anything higher, even a single story more, is going to shade out 4 of my fruit trees and at least 1 of my rows. And we're a small farm, it's 1/8 of an acre. So with 1 story increase, we're gonna lose, you know, up to like 6 hours of sunlight, and we'll only get the morning sun, afternoon, you know, the late afternoon sun. And then that's, you know, that's not going to be enough to sustain our apple trees and our Asian pears. So that's a huge threat. And so I've been really trying to stay in touch with them and just stay in the know as far as what are their plans to build, and also making sure, you know, really laying it on like this is a gem out here. Like, you know, you building is a direct threat to, you know, just community health, to like a carbon sink, to, you know, a source of food, a source of income and education for the community. So, you know, just really trying to let them know. But at the end of the day, you know, they're gonna do what they're gonna do, and so it may come to, you know, kind of rallying up the troops around us and, you know, trying to raise a ruckus and get enough attention on it that they decide to keep it at the 1 story. But we'll see what happens. So those are kind of some of the challenges that we have with our urban farms.
Cool. Hey, can I ask one question that came up? Maybe Cahill or Ray or Art. When starting conversations with cities, counties, and school districts, we often lead with, we need land and money, not just land. Is there a better approach? And I just wondered who might like to jump in on that one.
I don't mind jumping in. I was thinking about that question too. I saw it on the chat. So I'll just read a quote from Fannie Lou Hamer, famous voting rights activist, organizer, inspirations. It says, down here where we are, food is used as a political weapon. But if you have a pig in your backyard, if you have some vegetables in your garden, you can feed yourself and your family and nobody can push you around. And another quick one, really quick, by Elaine Brown of the Black Panther Party, talking about the breakfast program, was that the free breakfast program they did was, the idea was obviously twofold: for the specific purpose of serving those people who were directly benefited by our programs, but also secondarily to influence the minds of people and to understand not only that the Black Panther Party was providing them this food, but more importantly, that if they could get food, that maybe they would want clothing, maybe they would want housing, maybe they would want land, and maybe they would want ultimately some abstract thing called freedom. And so it was to use the survival program as a political organizing tool. And so I bring those up for a specific reason and to address the question that we have to be very adept. We have to be very adept at code switching and knowing when it makes sense to be our true selves and when it makes sense to hide our more radical intentions to get things done and to also protect ourselves, because frankly, for those who know the history of what happened and continues to happen to the Black Panther Party and Black radical movements, they get the maximum force of the state against them. Bombs, guns, shootings, destruction, FBI agents, so much investment to destroy these movements that are simply about feeding communities and getting land, because it's just that radical. They understand the empire that is. And we have to recognize we're living within an empire and we're in the belly of the beast. And anything that seeks to undermine the empire explicitly will be destroyed by the empire. That's just how it works. The maintenance of power, right? And so we got to be clear and adept at code switching and talking to our people and building consciousness about what we're doing. But then when we go sit in front of the city, we got to be like job development, green job creation, remediation, like all these other things, these terms that matter to them. And my perspective on that is like, don't go to them and tell them what you need from them. Show them your power. What can we offer you? You as a city have a mandate from the state of California to recycle your organic waste. We can do that for you. In fact, you should pay us. You as a city have a mandate to build all this housing. You have a mandate to clean up Superfund sites. You have all of these things. And if you're going after grants, or if they want to go after grants and get money into the city, you have to address displacement. You have to prevent gentrification. You have to be equitable. And they don't know how to do that, frankly. They weren't trained to. And the community actually has those solutions. So approaching them rather than saying what we need and saying, here's what we can offer you, how you want to work with us. And that's kind of what we did with Huerta del Valle, because like I said, the city got this grant. They had to do a community garden. And they didn't know what they were doing. So we were like, well, we do. And that's kind of where we built that relationship. I have a lot more to say, but I know we're kind of short on time. But that's one of the things, is really flipping the script and showing your own power as a community.
Sweet. Cahill, did you have a thought on, what can we ask for aside from just the land?
Yeah, I really, really like what you're saying, Art. And it's something you also have to realize that the city has these quotas or whatever they have to meet. So in city of Berkeley, we're fortunate that the city is committed to a climate action plan. And part of that is through the establishment of more community gardens and open spaces. And on top of that, if you're looking for more funding other than just land, it's kind of looking, so like in our project, we focused on Berkeley high school students of color. And we did that because there is a mandate through the Berkeley Unified School District of the 2020 vision of developing resiliency and attaining academic success for students of color. And so you can kind of fit your program, whatever it is you're trying to do, to different guidelines that the city has to meet that is going to, that's going to make them want to fund you, because in the end, it's helping them help you. And also one other thing I wanted to say is you just really have to get the community's input. So like in our case, our students surveyed the community. They had over 100 surveys that they went knocking on the doors of people's houses outside of Mi Tierra Grocery at San Pablo Park. And so once they collected all this data, they found 95% of residents want this community garden. So you can go to the city council members who, these are their constituents in their district. And, if you're saying 95% of people in your district want this to happen, like that has some power in it too. So just really focusing back on the community.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cahill. All right, so thank you all of our panelists for sharing, the experiences and just the knowledge. So I was wondering, so something I wanted to put out there, maybe you can hear from one or two of the panelists real quick is like what is maybe an action item that our audience members can take to kind of help further along the work we are doing. So I know it's a lot to put into a little ask, so maybe not, start growing all your own food. Don't go to the grocery store. Like what is a simple like first step that they might be able to take, to further this work, to support the furthering of this work. And I guess I'll go ahead and start. That way I'll give you all some time to think on it. So I think one thing that I always ask people to do is just look to where your food is coming from. Even when we go to the grocery store and we see, oh, organic, that's dope. But it does, the benefits of organic outweigh the fact that it's coming from, the next continent over. So just look at where the food comes from. I think that will really begin to open our eyes to the scale at which our food system is operating right now. So I'll pass it to Art. I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, we wouldn't be where we are, or Huerta del Valle wouldn't have achieved the things it did without pro bono legal support from UCI, Community Economic Development Legal Clinic. So if any of you are connected with that type of service or could provide that type of service, that's essential, because that's hundreds of thousands of dollars that we don't have. Plus, you can count that as leverage or match dollars on grants, and it's really useful. Same thing for architects or landscape design, any kind of pro bono. So if folks are doing that work or whatever, that's a huge asset to this movement. And it also helps us to translate our ideas in a kind of tangible way, or in a functional way, to the cities or public agencies who kind of are very bureaucratic. They need to see that landscape architecture diagram. They need to see that legal agreement. And that's just stuff we don't always have time for, or the knowledge and skills. Not everyone's a lawyer or an architect. And then last but not least, recognizing that, at least in my experience, the money has to be there first. A lot of the political will doesn't exist unless there's some economic incentive, if the dollars are already in the community, or if there's a real chance of accessing a significant grant. And so the political will kind of, to me, comes after the drop of money or the potential of money, because cities go after grants too, and counties and parks. I mean, they're fundraising just like we are. And so kind of recognizing the trajectory, money, then they're going to act. So don't try to get them to act, try to figure out how to bring investment towards these types of, into these communities, and see about, then you're going to see more action on the political side, I think, personally.
Also, the Sustainable Economies Law Center in particular is very supportive around both land use agreement access options and also cooperatives development. They're a Oakland-based community legal nonprofit organization that is specifically centered around a combination of urban agriculture and open space access and affordable housing. Thanks.
All right. Any other action items you want to offer before we move on?
Yeah, I thought of some, just tangible things, because we're still in our, like grassroots phase of our development. So like I said, that Prop 68 community meeting this Saturday, if any of you even want to distribute that flyer and that info so we can get the max amount of, diversity and voices heard, that's, really what we need at this time. And also something else we're trying to do with our students, because it's over Zoom, is do like a speaker series. So if any of you are maybe interested coming to speak with the students over Zoom and share your story, just kind of like we're talking about here, because I'm sure a lot of you on the call have some really great work that you're doing. So, okay, awesome, Nicole. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I was on mute. All right, so the last thing I will So I'll put it out to the audience. Does anyone in the audience have maybe an action item that they want to commit to taking to support this work, or that maybe they are already taking to support, just land access for communities and groups who need it, or just food justice in general?
And while we wait on that, I'm also going to mention we've just had dropped in the chat a survey to respond on providing feedback on today's session. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you. So awesome. So I see, let's see, that was Nicole mentioned that that they created a seed keeping and barter system. So that's awesome. Taking capitalism out of it, just exchanging, sharing. I love it. And trying to buy food at farmers market and paying to CSA. So there you go. Again, elevating local food systems. All right. So again, there's the. Please click the link and give us an evaluation. Let us know what you thought. Your honest and open thoughts on today's session. And thank you again for for being here. So
A couple of quick ideas that came up, and just wrapping up. Mentioned a seed library. Another mentioned schools and getting more school soils tested. What do you guys think of that?
I love it. I love it. I think we far too often forget, our children are, at these places, at these schools, a lot, much of their day. And the part they usually like the most is being outside and playing. So it'd be good to know what it is exactly they're exposed to, and if there's anything we need to be remediating. I love that. All right. So let's see, if there's nothing else, I'll go ahead and we'll begin to wrap up as y'all are filling out that survey. So we wanted to, we talked a lot about challenges that we're facing. There's a lot of just, trying to overcome the system that we're kind of all forced into. So we want to end it on a little lighter note. And so we wanted to kind of just offer these words that, help, that are really giving us life right now. So I know Cahill had something, a quote that's really close, near and dear to her. So I'll let them share that.
Yeah. So this was a book I just read called See No Stranger by Valerie Carr. I had like 3 pages written of just quotes because it's a really great book. I encourage you all to check out, but it kind of starts off with, what if the darkness we see is not the darkness of the tomb, but of the womb? And so the quote that I wanted to read is, progress during birthing labor is cyclical, not linear. We carry the memory of movements that came before us. Each time the people organized, each turn through the cycle opened a little more space for equality and justice. And so I really like this quote because, by Valerie Carr, I really like this quote because, we're all laboring in some sort. All of us on this call, and even every single individual in what you're doing. And to just remind yourself that it's a process, and we're standing on the shoulders of all the movements and people and ancestors that came before us. That just keeps you motivated in doing the work that you're doing.
Beautiful, thank you. All right, and let's see. Did any of our other panelists have a quote that they wanted to share, something that's really just kind of giving them life?
Yeah, I'll go. This is from Nelson Mandela. And it says, a fundamental concern for others in our individual and community lives will go a long way in making the world the better place we so passionately dreamt of. And this really resonates because justice is about caring for others, right? And then we have cultural healing, All right. If we know that we've caused trauma to other cultures, then we should care enough to do something about it and make these changes. So just caring for others, super important.
Love it. I love it. Art, do you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, sure. This is a Cesar Chavez quote from La Causa autobiography of Cesar. And he says, political power is not enough. Although I've been at it for some 30 years, all the time and money and effort haven't brought about any significant change whatsoever. Effective political power is never going to come, particularly to minority groups, unless they have economic power. And however poor they are, even the poor people have to organize economic power. Political power by itself, as we've tried to fathom it and to fashion it, like striking a match that goes out. Economic power is like having a generator to keep that bulb burning all the time. So we have to develop economic power to assure a continuation of political power. He says, I'm not advocating black capitalism or brown capitalism. At the worst, it gets a black to exploit other blacks or a brown to exploit others. At the best, it only helps the lives of the few. What I'm suggesting is a cooperative movement. And that kind of goes to his development of cooperative business models and really focusing on that economic side of building power.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that. And then I'll go ahead and share something. So I wrote this. This is something I wrote myself. So I guess I'm quoting me. It's a poem I wrote in response to a lot that was going on. It had been a really intense year of farming, to say the least. And so, yeah, I'll go ahead and I should say there might be a bit of a trigger warning for those who have experienced abuse or seen violence in their community. So I'll go ahead and say that now. And I'll go ahead and debrief this at the end as well. So it's called I'm Just a Farmer. I'm just a farmer, yet here I am. A young woman hides near the backstop by the farm because she's being abused. She's scared and hesitant to talk. I bring her water and a snack. We share a silence. I'm just a farmer. Two boys fight in the intersection, one pummeling the other, standing over him as tears stream down his face, streaming faster with every swing, not understanding his true strength. I pull him off and do my best to let my words of peace and self settle in his mind. I'm just a farmer. A group of kids steal a young volunteer's bike from just outside the farm. I hop in my truck and follow just behind them. Minutes later, I return the bike to the farm, triumphantly. It's the thief's bike, but the young visitor is satisfied with the new ride. I'm just a farmer. Gunshots ring out. A car creeps slowly to a stop. One hand to my ear calling for help. With the other, I scale the fence and run to assist. Blood on every surface except the whites of his eyes, which are fading fast. Where is he hit? How many times? Let's keep pressure on the wounds. My heart hurts and his struggles to beat. His friend is silent as we do what we can, but his distant gaze shouts a deafening prayer for the wounded man. I see the life leaving his eyes. He was so young. I'm just a farmer. I sow seeds and show young ones do the same. While some steal and wound what grows here, some of us still believe in helping, healing, learning, loving, and growing. Someone has to. After all, I'm just a farmer. So that's a piece I wrote again. It was a pretty intense year, as you can tell from that. That all happened in a single season, and I feel like it's often forgotten that as urban farmers, we still contend with everything that happens around the farm itself. So we are not just living in silos as farmers. Sometimes we are counselors, we are friends, we are mentors, we are supporters for our communities. So it's really key to remember that. And so someone mentioned earlier about something along the lines of policy. And I think this is something that we mentioned to the panelists in our previous discussions, is like, man, there's really a need to do other things, but it's so hard for us to do that when we're already dealing with so much. So I guess this is me asking for you to really reach out and support the groups around you who are trying to provide access to land that's going to feed community, and more than just their stomachs, but their minds and their hearts and souls. You know, as we've seen how like Ray is doing the holistic healing, he's feeding every part of the being. So yeah, just remember that, and our asks are more than just access to land for the sake of growing. It's that way. It's so that way our communities can thrive. So with that, thank you all for attending. I feel like I've learned a lot, you know, speaking with these panelists in the past few days, and especially right here, hearing all the share outs. I look forward to hearing from anybody in the audience. Please feel free to reach out. I'll go ahead and, so Rob, are we able to drop our emails?
You're welcome to if you'd like, absolutely. As long as you feel okay about that.
So yeah, I'll go ahead and drop mine, and I'll invite the other panelists to do so if they would like, but feel free to reach out to us if, whether it's in support or just seeking knowledge, partnership, whatever it might be. Please feel free to reach out.
I want to thank everyone on this panel, starting with Aaron de la Cerda, not only working with Acton on Verba Youth Farm Project, but also running a CSA with partners and FAM in the Fresno area as well. I want to thank Horatio Hartz with the Hartz Institute, Cultivating Land and Stewardship in Pittsburgh, California. I want to thank Cahill Verceles with Moving South Berkeley Forward, part of Berkeley Community Garden Collaborative, as well as her friend, mentor, Corinne Haskins, with so much respect and love there. Art Levine, also Huerta del Valle and Pitzer College, and for all your efforts and insights as well. I also have to thank Julio Contreras for all of his efforts in supporting today's webinar as well. We're gonna wrap up. I'm gonna leave an image on the screen for you to think about, right? Private lands and public lands are very much at times separate. They're not always thought of comprehensively together. Food secure, healthy communities really need that comprehensive approach. We can't do it without you, but many of the nonprofits that are operating now are very small operations. They're 2 to 4 person organizations, 2 to 5 person organizations, and they do the best they can within the neighborhoods and the context and the environments in which they work. So think about a comprehensive approach. What makes sense from a policy perspective that can thread together public and private lands and support both, ultimately serving those with the least resources who may not always be at the table because they're working 12 and 14-hour days. Things to think about in securing healthy communities, not just healthy food. So the goals are really ultimately healthy food systems, healthy environments, healthy county residents for a healthy California and healthy world. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.